The night settles over Egypt like a veil of silk, the air heavy with the scent of dust and river reeds. The moon leans low over the Nile, and for a moment, the water seems alive, not as a current, but as a memory. Its surface glows with the faintest shimmer, a mirror that has seen the birth and death of dynasties. Along its edge, the wind moves softly, carrying the ghost of voices that once sang praises to forgotten gods. You stand at the river's edge, and it feels as though the land itself is breathing through the water, exhaling the stories it has guarded for 5,000 years. They say the Nile was the first road ever carved by nature, a road of light, of time, of worship. Along its banks rose cities whose names still hum beneath the earth: Thebes, Abydos, Memphis. Temples aligned not just to the stars, but to the river's sacred rhythm. When the flood came, it was not seen as destruction, but as renewal, the pulse of a god awakening. The ancient Egyptians called it Iteru, the great river, the bloodline of creation. It was said that when the waters swelled, the goddess Isis wept, her tears filling the valley, bringing life to the barren sand. Yet the Nile was not always gentle. Beneath its calm shimmer, explorers and priests whispered of other things, of caverns carved beneath its bed, of hidden tombs drowned by centuries of silt. In the 19th century, early archaeologists like Flinders Petrie found remnants of temples along stretches once thought lost forever. Blocks of sandstone still glistened with faint carvings: lotus, falcon, and star, preserved by the very waters that had buried them. Some even claimed to have seen phosphorescent lights beneath the surface at night, a shimmer too steady to be reflection. Fishermen along the upper Nile called them the breaths of the ancients, the souls of those who built the river's first shrines. As the current drifts past Aswan, the stones of Philae rise from the water like a memory reawakened. Once, before the building of the high dam, this temple was nearly lost, its columns swallowed by the Nile's slow ascent. Divers reported strange symbols etched into its submerged foundations, constellations that did not match any known star map. Some scholars dismissed them as erosion. Others quietly wondered if they were meant to be seen only by the gods beneath the surface. Even now, the river holds contradictions: creation and loss, silence and song. Archaeologists uncover fragments of ancient boats near Abydos. They were blackened but intact, built for journeys not of commerce, but of ceremony. These were not meant to carry grain or gold, but spirits. The Egyptians believed the soul traveled westward with the sun, and perhaps the Nile was the bridge, not between lands, but between realms. The river bends near Luxor, where the Valley of the Kings sleeps beneath the cliffs. Here, the sands hide what the water once kissed: tombs of kings who feared eternity without remembrance. Some are carved so deep into the limestone that even the desert wind cannot reach them. Yet others remain unseen, swallowed by the Nile's slow, eternal drift. In 1907, when the archaeologist Edward Ayrton uncovered the tomb of Queen Thais' family, he spoke of hearing faint trickles of water beneath the rock, as though the river itself was whispering in the dark. But there are older stories still, stories the locals tell in quiet tones when the night thickens. They speak of an island that appears only in the flood season, when the moon is full. Upon it stands a single pillar of black stone, smooth and cold, marked by no tool. Those who have seen it say it hums faintly, like a living heart. When the waters recede, it vanishes, leaving no trace. Some call it the resting place of a lost temple, one built before the first pharaoh, when gods and rivers spoke as one. Perhaps these are only dreams, or perhaps dreams are what the Nile remembers best. Every ripple, every grain of sand carries the dust of something sacred. Beneath the waters of Nubia lie towns and sanctuaries displaced by the rising dam, like echoes folded into deeper echoes. Yet even there, the river remains alive. Fishermen still light small clay lamps and set them adrift on its surface at dusk. Offerings to the unseen, gestures to those who came before. The flames float silently downstream, their reflections stretching into infinity, like constellations adrift upon the earth. As dawn begins to wash the sky with pale gold, the river grows quieter, its whisper retreating beneath the hum of waking life. You imagine the countless eyes that have watched this same horizon. Kings and peasants, priests and wanderers, all standing by this same breath of water, all listening to its hidden voice. And still, the Nile flows, unhurried, unbroken, carrying its secrets between stars and sand. Its course has shifted, its banks have changed, yet its spirit endures, the oldest storyteller the world has ever known. It has seen empires rise, prayers fade, temples sink beneath their own shadows. It remembers every word, even those unspoken. The desert around Abydos is silent, except for the soft hum of the wind moving through broken pylons and half-buried walls. Beneath the sand, beneath even the temple of Seti I, there lies something older. A hall carved deep into living rock, flooded with still water, as if the earth itself had been hollowed to make room for memory. They call it the Osirian, the House of Osiris, the god of return. When Flinders Petrie and Margaret Murray first descended into its depths in 1902, they described a stone passage leading downward through darkness, its walls lined with red granite blocks so massive they seemed to belong to another age entirely. The floor was covered by a thin layer of water, shimmering in torchlight like liquid glass. At the far end stood an arched doorway, smooth, undecorated, strangely modern, leading to what they called a chamber for which no purpose can be clearly known. Locals had long believed the place was a gate, not a tomb, not a shrine, but a passage through time itself. In the carvings above the temple of Seti I, there is a panel that lists the names of 76 kings, the so-called Abydos King List, stretching back into prehistory. Each name is an echo of reigns long gone. Beneath those names, the Osirian rests like a reflection, as if the temple above looks downward into its own shadow. Some archaeologists note that the structure is misaligned with Seti's temple, built on a lower axis, facing slightly west. Others whisper that it was built deliberately so, a mirror of the heavens below the earth, where the sun of yesterday rises again. You descend into the chamber. The air is cool and heavy, and every step echoes into the stillness. Between the massive pillars, the water moves gently, reflecting the light of your lantern in trembling gold. The columns are marked with faint inscriptions, symbols of stars, spirals, boats. One depicts the god Thoth, holding a reed pen before a doorway that shines like the sun. The inscription reads, "He opens the way for time to remember." Archaeologists believe the Osirian was part of Seti's funerary complex, symbolizing the tomb of Osiris, the god who died and was reborn. Yet even they admit the architecture feels older than its king. Some of the blocks weigh more than 100 tons, fitted so precisely that even the thinnest blade cannot slip between them. It is the style of the earliest dynasties, not the 19th. When the early excavators first entered the hall, their reports mentioned something odd. The scent of lotus flowers, though no trace of vegetation was found. And the sound, a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to rise from the stone itself. They thought it was the echo of dripping water. But in local legend, that sound was said to be the breath of Osiris, the pulse of the world renewing itself. You stand before the gate. It is simple, a single rectangular portal carved with astonishing precision, as though made not for sight but for passage. The granite glows faintly under torchlight. Its lintel bears no words, only the faint outline of a circle. Perhaps the solar disk, perhaps something older still. In the hush, you imagine Seti himself walking here, guided by priests bearing lamps of alabaster. The ritual texts say the king entered this place to meet the first time, the moment of creation, so that his spirit could rise again with the dawn. Perhaps this is why the floor is filled with water, a mirror for rebirth, the surface between two worlds. Perhaps it is not the river that forgets, but we. Some modern engineers believe the Osirian once formed part of a hydraulic system, the water channeled from the nearby canal. But to the ancients, water was memory, the divine medium through which yesterday could be reflected and reborn. When you look down, your own reflection shivers in the dark surface. For a moment, it seems older. Not your face, but another's, one that looks back with calm recognition. The light of your lamp flickers, and the carvings seem to move. The figure of Thoth raises his pen. The circle above the doorway pulses softly, as if breathing. The air grows warm, almost luminous. You feel that if you stepped through, you would not find another chamber but another time. And perhaps you would not be leaving at all, but returning. When the explorers of the early 20th century sealed the site again, they left a note on the wall in chalk. To those who find this, remember, the water knows. No one knows who wrote it. Now the Osirian stands half-flooded, its columns reflecting the stars that still rise over Abydos. The water shifts gently in the night wind. The gate waits, its surface smooth as memory. Perhaps it was never meant to be entered. Perhaps it was built only to remind the earth that yesterday still exists, folded beneath today, breathing softly through stone and water. And as the wind sighs through the ruined temple above, you hear it, that same deep vibration, the hum that never ceased, the breath of time echoing in the dark. For the Nile is not only a current of water, but of memory, of the unending dream between dusk and dawn. In the desert north of Dashur, where the horizon ripples like heat made solid, there stands a foundation of stone, half buried, half forgotten. It is not marked on most maps. A faint square of limestone blocks, nothing more, lost beneath dunes the color of faded parchment. Yet archaeologists who have walked this stretch of sand speak of it in quiet tones. They call it the pyramid that was never built. It lies near the remains of Sneferu's first experiments in perfection. The bent pyramid and the red pyramid, born of trial and error, still rise proudly nearby. But a few kilometers north, the ground dips toward what early surveyors called Zoyet El Arian, a place of beginnings abandoned midway through a dream. The site was first described by the British engineer John Shea Paring in the 1830s and later re-examined by Flinders Petrie. What they found puzzled everyone. An enormous rectangular pit cut deep into limestone bedrock, surrounded by unfinished causeways and fragments of casing blocks. No burial chamber, no capstone, no ascending core. Only the ghost of an intention. The Arabs who lived near the site called it Haram el-Midawara, the circular pyramid, though no true circle exists there. When explorers descended into the trench, they found a massive granite sarcophagus carved from a single block, empty, sealed, and never used. Its lid weighed nearly 60 tons. No inscription named a king. No mark gave a clue to its age. Later analysis suggested it might belong to the late 4th dynasty, perhaps to a forgotten successor of Khafre. But the evidence was thin. The archaeologist Reisner called it a project begun by pride and ended by silence. At sunset, the foundations cast long shadows across the sand, forming a perfect geometry that seems to reach toward completion. Standing there, one can almost feel the rhythm of an interrupted prayer. Thousands of laborers called away, chisels left embedded in stone, ramps half-carved, plans folded back into the wind. Ancient Egyptians believed every pyramid was a bridge between the earth and the imperishable stars, a frozen ladder to the sky. To leave one unfinished was an act heavy with consequence. Texts from the Pyramid Age speak of builders performing rites of closure even for incomplete works, so that the spirit of the design may rise though the stone sleeps. Perhaps that was done here. Fragments of copper tools were found near the foundation trench, their edges still sharp beneath centuries of sand. Archaeologists uncovered traces of red pigment, the guidelines of masons who measured with cords aligned to the rising of Orion's belt. The orientation was flawless, even though the structure was never raised. It was as if precision mattered more than existence itself. You can imagine the royal architect standing in the heat of the early morning, reed pen in hand, drawing invisible lines in the air. He looks toward the horizon where the Nile gleams faintly. He knows his design will never reach the sky, yet he draws anyway, a gesture of faith or perhaps defiance. And if you listen closely enough, when the night grows still, you may hear it whisper, not of what was lost, but of what still waits to be found beneath the breath of time. Some myths speak of a hidden pyramid, one that could never be built because it was not meant for the living. A design meant to house time itself, invisible to all but the gods. When the wind passes across the plateau of Zoyet El Arian, it hums faintly through the hollow cuttings in the rock, a sound like breath beneath the sand. Standing at its edge, the silence feels deeper than elsewhere in Egypt. The air trembles, and for a moment the desert seems to listen. You begin to sense that absence is its own monument, that what was never finished still endures in another form. The pyramids that remain touch the sky. This one touches memory. Archaeologists often close their reports with practical words: measurements, dimensions, soil analysis. But one note, written by a surveyor in 1905, still survives in the archives at Cairo. It reads simply, "The structure feels complete, though unseen. When the sun falls behind Dashur, the dunes grow pale, and the wind begins to sing through the unfinished pit. The sound deepens, echoing against the granite block below, a sound like stone remembering the shape it wished to be. Perhaps the pyramid was never abandoned. Perhaps it was finished in another way, not with hands, but with silence. And as night returns to the desert, you can almost hear the soft hum of chisels still carving in the dark. Not in rock, but in time. In the pale hush of night, the temple lies half buried beneath the sand and half awake under the stars. You walk the silent corridor of the sanctuary of Temple of Hathor at Dendera, its columns towering like ancient sentinels, their capitals carved with the cow ears of Hathor, the goddess of birth, healing, and the moon. The desert at night is a sea of silence. It is here, they say, that the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes as thin as the linen that covers a sleeper, as quiet as the breath before a whisper. By torchlight you descend into the crypt beneath the temple, into the chamber where pilgrims once lay upon stone benches, their faces turned to the sky embedded in the ceiling, stars held still in paint and pigment. The walls murmur with inscriptions describing how the god Harsamptis emerged from a lotus, of how the serpent of creation stirred, and of how the sleeping mind becomes the gate. In this chamber, the water of the sacred lake outside is reflected on the walls, and the air smells of lotus and dust and promise. Here, in that quiet chamber, the ritual begins. The sleeper enters not a tomb, but a threshold. They arrive with a question of healing, of lost love, of a name forgotten, and they lie within the temple's womb. The priests stoke the lamps low, the shadows lengthen, the columns breathe in rhythm with the sleeper's breath. Outside, the Nile flows as if in slow thought. Inside, the dream takes shape. The ancient texts speak of incubation, the act of sleeping in the temple so that the god may speak through the sleeper, not with voice, but with images, with touches, with memories of other lives. The Egyptians believed that in dreams the divine visited the mortal, that the temple became a vessel for messages too old for sound. Imagine a child laid on the stone bench, staring at the ceiling, the image of Nut, the sky goddess, bending over the world. She pours stars across the arch. The child waits. The world beyond dissolves. And then the dream comes. Perhaps a hand of light touches the sleeper's shoulder. Perhaps a voice speaks in the language of water, of falling reed and moonlit reflection. The sleeper rises and the priest interprets what was seen. A scarab scar channel, a throne beneath the waves, the face of a lost brother. The temple does not answer in words. It answers in return. When morning light pours into the hypostyle hall, the dreamer emerges. The eyes are calm, the memory vivid but elusive. They carry a token, perhaps a symbol of Hathor, or the hush of the star ceiling in their mind. They walk away though the temple remains still, silent again. But the temple itself remembers. In the darkest hours before dawn, the carved reliefs still seem to shift. The snake of Harsamptis coils. The lotus opens. The stars above glint. The stones breathe the memory of all who have slept within, all who have heard the whisper of the invisible. The corridor stands ready for the next sleeper, so that in the world of waking, a glimpse of the sacred may be carried like a spark. Perhaps the temple did not merely speak through dreams. No wind, no motion, only the quiet shimmer of stars over the Theban cliffs. Somewhere beyond the reach of torchlight, beneath a wall of limestone, lies a tomb unlike any other, the one the locals call the tomb written in light. Perhaps it kept its voice hidden until the sleeper's mind became the microphone. And in that hush between sleeping and waking, you can feel it. The soft hum of stone remembering, of the divine leaning near, of the world beyond sight opening just for a moment. Sleep now. The temple watches. You may not hear its voice, but once you have walked through its corridors of stars and still water, you carry its secret into the night. The desert after dusk glows like cooled copper. At the edge of the Siwa oasis, the sand drifts in long, patient waves, swallowing and revealing ruins with every season. Beneath one of these shifting ridges, a small team of archaeologists works by lantern light. Their shadows move like hieroglyphs against the walls of a half-collapsed chamber. They are searching for what the elders call Beit el-Hekmah, the House of Wisdom. In ancient Egypt, every great temple held its own parank, a house of life. Part library, part school, part sanctuary. Priests there copied hymns, medical texts, and star maps. They believed that writing itself was a living being, a god with breath. When temples fell, the scrolls were hidden. Some were burned, others entombed beneath sand. At Siwa, tradition said the last library slept intact, waiting for the world to remember. Archaeologist Ahmed Fakhri, writing in the 1940s, mentioned hearing stories of a buried structure near the Temple of Ammonius, where Alexander the Great once came to ask the oracle of his divinity. He dismissed them as myth. Yet, in recent decades, surveys with ground-penetrating radar found hollow spaces under the dunes, stone corridors leading nowhere visible, chambers filled with air older than empire. Now the diggers clear the last layer of sand. The air is cold, tasting faintly of salt. One student brushes dust from a block of limestone engraved with faint lines, rows of symbols half erased. A seated scribe, a papyrus scroll, a bird with outstretched wings. Below it, a single word in hieratic, rec, knowledge. They widen the opening. The lamplight falls into a shaft leading downwards, its sides lined with niches. Inside the first niche rests a fragment of blackened papyrus, brittle as autumn leaf. Under magnification, the ink still glimmers blue, Egyptian indigo, bound with gum Arabic. The writing is too fine to decipher, but the first visible sign is the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth. The student trembles. The air smells faintly of cedar oil and age. It is said that when explorers first entered it, perhaps in the late 1800s during the feverish age of Egyptian discovery, their lamps dimmed not from lack of oil, but as though the walls themselves refused to be disturbed. Yet, in that darkness, faint patterns glowed, not painted, not carved, but shining softly from the stone itself. Was this one of the hidden houses of life, the living archives mentioned on the walls of Abydos and Edfu? The text spoke of rooms of writing beneath the earth, where the breath of Thoth is stored. Perhaps this was one. From above, the wind moves through the dunes with a low hum. Sand sifts into the chamber like slow rain. The archaeologists pause. Somewhere beyond the wall, water drips. Steady, rhythmic. The sound is soft, like someone turning a page. They find more. Fragments of wood, small alabaster jars once filled with ink, shards of faience bearing fragments of stars and numbers, perhaps parts of a celestial calendar. A narrow stair descends deeper, but at its base the passage ends in a slab of rose granite, sealed and perfect. Carved into it is a single glyph, an open eye. They touch the stone. It is warm. Instruments record no heat source. One of the team murmurs a line from the pyramid texts. He who knows his name will open the gate of yesterday. They decide not to break the seal. The senior archaeologist marks the coordinates, fills the chamber with inert gas to preserve the air, and covers the entrance again. The desert will keep its secret. Later, as the camp sleeps, the wind rises. The dunes shift with a sound like distant whispering. For a moment, it seems the sand is murmuring words. Not in Egyptian, not in any tongue, but in the slow cadence of remembering itself. Perhaps the library was never meant to be read. Perhaps it exists only to remind the earth that knowledge still breathes beneath silence. Some believed it was a trick of phosphorescence. Others whispered of something older, something divine. When dawn comes, the dunes are smooth again. The wind has erased all sign of digging. Yet beneath, the sealed chamber waits, heavy with ink and breath. Somewhere under miles of dust, The last unread sentence of an ancient world still glows faintly, waiting for someone who will listen, not to learn, but to dream. At dawn, when the first light brushes the cliffs of Thebes, two colossal figures rise from the mist like sentinels of another age. They have stood there for more than 3,000 years, guarding the western plain of Luxor. Travelers call them the Colossi of Memnon, though they were carved for Amenhotep III, the pharaoh who built his palace of 1,000 columns. Each statue is hewn from a single block of quartzite brought from quarries near Cairo, hauled hundreds of miles down the Nile. They once flanked the entrance to the grand mortuary temple, an empire of reflection, where the living king prepared to meet eternity. Now the temple has vanished, swallowed by floods and centuries of dust, and only the two giants remain. The Greeks who came later told another story. At sunrise, they said, one statue sang. A soft, ringing tone rose from the stone whenever the light struck it after the night's dew. Strabo heard it in 24 BCE. The Emperor Hadrian's wife, Sabina, heard it too. They wrote that the statue spoke like a lyre touched by the sun. Some said it was Memnon, son of the dawn goddess Eos, greeting his mother. Others believed it was the voice of the sculptor himself, echoing through his work. Modern scholars explain it differently. Heat expanding cracks in the quartzite, releasing trapped moisture into sound. But even that explanation admits its poetry, the earth breathing back what hands once shaped. Imagine the day it was carved, the desert full of hammer strokes, the scent of copper and dust. Hundreds of artisans moving in rhythm, their hearts synchronized with chisel and sun. One master oversees the work, a sculptor whose name is lost but whose touch remains. He traces the curve of the lips, the weight of calm over the brow. He knows this face is not of flesh but of memory. When the statue was complete, the workers stood in silence. The pharaoh approached, his sandals whispering over sand. He looked up at his likeness and smiled. The sculptor bowed. Neither spoke, but the stone remembered. Centuries passed. Floods from the Nile tore through the temple. Earthquakes shattered the southern figure. Still each dawn, when the first warmth touched its fissures, a note rose, a sound like breath returning. For 6 centuries it sang, until Roman engineers repaired the cracks and silenced it forever. Today, tourists stand in the same dawn light. The air smells of dust and river reeds. The statues are silent, yet something lingers. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear that ancient resonance. Stone remembering the hand that shaped it. This chapter begins with a single beam of moonlight entering through a narrow fissure in the rock. The dust glitters, drifting like memory itself. You follow the light down into the heart of the tomb, where the walls begin to breathe in gold and silence. Archaeologists have found the remnants of the temple foundation beneath the earth. Carved fragments of gods, lotus capitals, and a stele describing Amenhotep III as the one who rejoices when the morning comes. His artisans were famed for precision so fine that joints between blocks could hold a feather's width. Some fragments bear faint traces of red pigment, once the color of life. Standing before the statues, one realizes they were never just monuments. They were instruments, the desert's own memory carved in resonance. When the sun rises, light seeps through the cracks, and the stone warms slowly, as if inhaling. You can almost feel it stir, waiting for its maker. Perhaps the sculptor placed a secret inside. His breath, his silence, his hope that the stone might awaken when he was gone. Perhaps that is what all art is, matter waiting to remember the touch that gave it meaning. As the morning grows, shadows retreat into the plain. The statues stand motionless, unbroken by time's noise, and though they no longer sing, the quiet hum of their endurance fills the air. Some say the song will return when the world learns again to listen. Until then, the stone keeps its secret, a memory shaped into silence. At the heart of ancient Thebes, beyond the columns of Karnak where sunlight falls like gold through stone ribs, there once stretched a garden that no longer blooms. Archaeologists uncovered its outlines in 2006. A square of fertile soil bounded by channels, beside a small pool where papyrus once grew. It was part of the temple of Ammonius' sacred lake complex, a living model of creation where water, seed, and starlight met. The Egyptians called such places the gardens of Perate, the season of growth. Within temple walls, these gardens were not decorative. They were sacred engines of renewal. Priests tended them as they would a god. Each dawn they watered the lotus ponds, recited hymns to Hapi, and placed new seeds in small clay cups shaped like tombs. Life and death mirrored each other in soil and silence. During the reign of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari, excavators led by Navil and later Winlock found ceremonial beds of earth lined with fragments of sycamore and myrrh roots. Nearby they uncovered a cache of seeds sealed in alabaster jars, still fragrant after 3 millennia. They were offerings for the afterlife, planted so that eternity might always awaken in bloom. Imagine the garden at its height, palms swaying, the blue water of the pool catching the sky, priests walking barefoot among rows of mandrake and lotus. A breeze passes, scattering petals onto limestone. The scent of life rises through the temple gates and mingles with incense. Each flower a syllable of creation, each seed a memory of the first dawn. They say this chamber was discovered near Deir el-Medina, where the artisans of the pharaohs once lived and built the resting places of kings. The records from that era, the time of Seti I and Ramesses II, mention an unfinished burial site known only as the House of the Returning Sun. Archaeologists later found a series of corridors that seemed too precisely aligned with the solstice dawn. When the first light of winter entered, it struck a panel deep within the tomb, igniting symbols unseen by ordinary eyes. At the center stood a basin of black granite. In its reflection, the priests read the rhythm of the heavens. They believed the Nile's flood, the moon's pull, and the human heart shared one pulse. Time, to them, was not a line but a garden. It slept, died, and returned. Later, under Amenhotep III, scribes recorded inventories of temple plants: acacia, henna, pomegranate, and papyrus, each assigned to a deity. Some were ground into oils, others burned in ritual lamps so the air itself became divine. When the desert advanced and the canals turned to dust, the gardens were buried, yet the seeds remained, small archives of breath waiting for rain. In 1923, fragments of dried petals were found sealed within a sandstone box at Karnak. Microscopic analysis revealed pollen from lotus, date, and cornflower, the same combination depicted in reliefs of offering scenes. Scientists concluded it had been a ritual bouquet, preserved by intention, not accident. The past had left itself a memory of spring. Now the space is empty. Only outlines remain, faint depressions where water once glimmered. But if you stand there at sunset, when the air grows heavy with the scent of the river, something stirs. Cicadas fall silent. The wind moves through invisible stems. You may feel the rhythm beneath your feet, a heartbeat deep in the soil. Perhaps the garden never died. Perhaps it only sleeps beneath the dunes, dreaming its own rebirth. And when night comes, the stars bloom above as flowers once did below, completing the circle that the priests once tended. Time breathes, the garden remembers. Night over Egypt, the river gleams like ink poured from the sky itself. Somewhere between Thebes and Heliopolis, the Nile flows without sound, mirroring constellations that once guided kings and harvests. To the ancients, this was not water. It was the Milky Way inverted, the heavens dreaming downward. The Egyptian priests called the star Sopdet, which the Greeks later named Sirius. Each year, when that blue-white point rose just before dawn, the Nile began to swell. It was no coincidence, it was a covenant. Sopdet's light announced the flood, the return of life, the breath of the world reborn. At Dendera, the Temple of Hathor was aligned so that the first ray of Sirius entered its sanctum on the morning of the new year. In Heliopolis, the priests of Ra measured that light with polished obsidian mirrors, their hands trembling as if touching eternity. Imagine that first shimmering rise on the eastern horizon. The desert still, the air cool, the silence vast. The priests gather in linen robes, faces turned upward. They raise vessels of river water, offering reflection to reflection. As Sopdet burns into view, her light spills into the bowls, and the river seems to awaken. One great pulse of heaven through earth. Hieroglyphs shimmered, not from pigment, but from a glaze within the rock. It was as though the stone had swallowed sunlight thousands of years ago and learned how to release it again, slowly, like breath. The people along the banks watched for this sign too. Farmers, potters, fishermen. All lived by the rhythm between star and flood. Their calendars were written not on paper but in light. 365 days traced by the journey of one star. Every season was a memory, every harvest a reenactment of creation. Archaeologists at Abydos and Edfu have found star charts carved into ceilings, constellations with outstretched arms, time woven into bodies of gods. The tomb of Senmut, architect of Hatshepsut, holds one of the earliest star maps known. Orion, Canis Major, the circles of hours passing like ripples over eternity. The priests called them decans, the watchers of each night. To sleep beneath them was to rest in the body of the cosmos. The Nile itself became a mirror of that order. The East Bank, the land of birth and sunrise. The West Bank, the land of setting and silence. Life and death, river and sky, pulse and dream. And in between flowed the eternal current, singing in a language too slow for speech. Modern science calls it coincidence. The heliacal rising of Sirius aligning with the monsoon in distant Ethiopia, feeding the flood. Yet even that fact carries awe. The same physics that governs stars also stirs the river's heart. The ancients were right in a way beyond their knowing. Heaven and earth do move as one. When Greek travelers came, they marveled that Egypt measured time by light. Herodotus wrote that no other land so perfectly married astronomy and faith. The priests of Heliopolis told him, "We do not watch the stars, we listen to them." And indeed, if you stood at Dendera in the hours before dawn, you might feel it too. The faint hum in the air before the first star rises, like the breath of the river holding itself still. In 1898, archaeologist Jean-Jacques de Morgan uncovered a fragmentary calendar near Edfu inscribed with the Festival of Sopdet. It named her Mistress of the Beginning of the Year, the one who awakens the Nile from its sleep. Even after 3 millennia, the ink had not faded. The words still shone faintly blue, as though the river itself had written them. Now the Nile runs the same course, but its floods are measured by dams, its rhythms harnessed by machines. Still, on some nights, when the air cools and the horizon clears, Sirius rises as it always did, bright, patient, eternal. And though no priests chant by torchlight, the river remembers. It carries the reflection of that same star, as if it, too, were dreaming. Perhaps that is what time truly is. Not a line, but a tide. Moving, retreating, returning. And perhaps the Nile never merely reflected the stars. Perhaps it dreamed them, shaping constellations in its own slow imagination, a mirror through which the universe once saw itself. When the wind moves across its surface tonight, the ripples shimmer like fragments of an ancient song. You step closer and see scenes of a journey, not of death, but of remembrance. A man stands between two horizons, his hands raised toward twin suns. Scholars identified the scene as a rare depiction of the soul's rebirth, the Ba leaving the body at dawn and returning at dusk. Yet here the suns are reversed. The rising one fades, the setting one burns brighter. What does it mean, this inversion of eternity? And if you listen softly between breath and sleep, you may hear it, the quiet murmur of the Nile dreaming of the stars. Some believe the tomb belonged not to a pharaoh, but to a priest of the Aten, one who followed Akhenaten's forbidden vision of light as divinity itself. There are faint traces of that theology, the outstretched rays, the hands holding ankhs, the circular sun disk above each figure. But the names have been erased, the cartouches chiseled smooth, as if light itself was banned. During the 1920s, a British epigrapher named Margaret Benson wrote of an unmarked chamber near the Valley of the Queens that glowed faintly at dusk, as though remembering the sun. Her report was dismissed as romantic exaggeration, yet later, in the 1960s, engineers restoring nearby tombs noticed an odd luminescent effect, salt crystals refracting the remaining pigment into a low golden light. Perhaps the tomb of light was no miracle, but chemistry. Or perhaps chemistry is only another word for forgotten magic. In the stillness, you feel the air thicken, warm, almost electric. The glow along the wall begins to pulse faintly, in rhythm with your breath. The carvings depict boats of flame crossing a sea of stars. Between them, slender figures kneel before a symbol, a circle surrounded by wings. The inscription beneath reads, "To return is to remember the light." You imagine the priest who once stood here, thousands of years ago, holding a bronze mirror to catch the sunrise and cast it upon these walls. Perhaps the tomb was built not to hold a body, but a moment, the exact point when the light of the living world touches the shadow of the next. When you finally turn back toward the entrance, the moonbeam that led you here has shifted. The glow recedes. The hieroglyphs grow quiet again, absorbed by the rock that birthed them. Outside, the wind returns, soft, indifferent, ancient. The cliffs of Thebes stand in silhouette, their edges lined with silver. You realize how fragile all discovery truly is. We illuminate what was hidden, only to find that the light itself was never ours to keep. Perhaps the tomb still waits beneath the sand, pulsing faintly beneath layers of time. Perhaps it was never found at all, only dreamed into existence by those who loved the idea of light that remembers. And in the hush before dawn, the desert breathes again, as though whispering a truth too soft for the waking world. Some tombs are not built for the dead. They are built for the light that refuses to die. Night folds itself over southern Egypt like a quiet shroud. Beyond the still sands of Nubia lies a stretch of dark, endless water. Lake Nasser, vast and silent, born not of nature but of human hands. Beneath its calm, glassy surface, they say, sleeps an entire city. Temples, walls, courtyards, all drowned by the rise of the great dam at Aswan. The people called it Jerf Hussein. The older ones whispered another name, Zat el Rim, the city of reflections. When the dam was built in the 1960s, the Nile was tamed, but memory was not. The river rose slowly, swallowing villages, palm groves, and ruins that had stood for 3,000 years. Archaeologists and engineers, part of UNESCO's Grand Rescue Mission, worked day and night to relocate the monuments of Nubia. The temples of Abu Simbel were lifted stone by stone, moved to higher ground. But not everything could be saved. Some temples, smaller and less celebrated, were left behind, left to sleep beneath the newborn lake. They say that on still nights, when the moon is full, the surface of Lake Nasser reflects more than the sky. It shows outlines, faint, wavering, of pillars and archways beneath the water. Fishermen claim to have heard strange hums rising from below, as if the city itself still breathed beneath the mirror. Scientists call it acoustics, the vibration of water over uneven stone. Yet others call it something older, the echo of remembrance. You imagine yourself drifting on a small wooden boat, the oars barely touching the water. The air is heavy, yet serene. Beneath you, the drowned courtyards of Jerf Hussein shimmer faintly in the moonlight. The temple once honored Ramesses II, its walls carved with scenes of divine offerings, the god Ptah receiving light from the hands of the king. Now those same carvings rest in darkness, visited only by fish and shadows. When Diverse descended decades later, they found something strange. A corridor perfectly preserved, its hieroglyphs clear as the day they were carved. One line read, "He who closes his eyes shall see the hidden light." The letters seemed to glow faintly, as if the lake itself guarded the temple's memory. Historians say that Nubia was once a bridge between two worlds, Egypt and Africa, north and south, life and afterlife. The temples built along the old riverbanks were not merely monuments, but markers of cosmic balance. To drown them was to drown a piece of the world's spiritual geometry. Yet perhaps, by resting beneath the water, they found another kind of eternity. In the stillness, you picture priests walking those corridors centuries ago, carrying oil lamps that flickered like stars upon the walls. You imagine their prayers rising into the ceiling, their echoes blending with the rush of the river outside. Now the same words drift upward through water, softened, dissolved, but not gone. As dawn nears, the reflection fades. The city beneath the mirror vanishes into silver mist. Yet you know it is still there, waiting, unbroken, untouched by time's impatience. Perhaps the city was not drowned at all. Perhaps it was merely carried from the realm of sight to the realm of memory. And as the morning sun burns upon the still surface, the river whispers again, in a language too ancient to name. Nothing truly vanishes. It only changes the way it remembers. The night smells of papyrus and dust. Somewhere in the labyrinth of ruins at Hermopolis, the ancient city of Thoth, a whisper lingers, older than the stones themselves. They say a set of scrolls once rested there, sealed in a chamber lit only by oil and silence. They told of kings erased from memory, of histories rewritten by decree, and of truths that the pharaohs feared to let live. The priests of Thoth called them the words of fire, because they glowed when read aloud. Each was said to contain a fragment of divine order, the sacred language that shaped creation. To speak them wrongly was to unmake what had been made. And so, under the reign of a jealous king, the scrolls were condemned to flame. The story begins in the late New Kingdom, around the time of Hormheb, the general who rose to power after the heresy of Akhenaten. The temples of Ammonius had been restored, and all trace of the sun cult was forbidden. In their zeal to cleanse Egypt of dangerous ideas, the priests ordered that all unlawful writings be gathered and destroyed. Many came from the libraries of Akhetaten, the city of the sun, where the priests of light had once written of unity, of a single eternal force behind all gods. To the new rulers, such words were blasphemy. By torchlight, scribes carried the papyri into the courtyards. The flames rose, consuming ink and memory alike. Yet among them, one scroll did not burn. The fire curled around it, as though reluctant to touch its surface. It was taken by a temple scribe, unnamed in records, but remembered in whispers, who fled south along the river to Thebes. There, it is said, he buried the scroll beneath the floor of a small chapel dedicated to the moon. Centuries later, in 1898, the archaeologist Georges Legrain uncovered a sealed chamber under the Karnak complex. Inside were hundreds of small bronze and alabaster figures, ritual offerings. Among them, fragments of blackened papyrus, fused into a single mass. When separated, faint golden letters appeared where the ink had burned away. They seemed written in a script unlike any known hand, thin, spiraled, luminous. Scholars could not read it, but local workers called it the breath of Thoth. Modern science might explain it as chemical reaction, gold dust mixed into ink, reacting to fire. But to those who stood there that day, the letters seemed alive, as if remembering their own destruction. You imagine the lost scribe, kneeling in the moonlit chamber, reading in silence. Each word, an invocation. Each line, a prayer to preserve what was not meant to die. The walls glow faintly, as though responding to the rhythm of his breath. The air smells of honeyed wax and ash. Outside, the Nile turns like a dark ribbon of glass, carrying secrets downstream. What could those forbidden words have said? Some believe they spoke of the balance between shadow and light, that both were sacred, and one could not exist without the other. Others think they revealed the true origin of writing itself. Not a human invention, but a divine memory written into the world before creation began. The last entry in Legrain's field notes mentions something unusual, a line of symbols resembling the crescent and ibis, the emblems of Thoth. Beneath it, he wrote only 3 words. It glows still. After his death, the fragment vanished from the record. Some say it was stored in Cairo, others that it was quietly buried again. Perhaps that is where such things belong. Not in museums, but in silence. The night deepens. You can almost hear the faint crackle of ancient fire, the breath of ink turning to smoke. The desert wind carries the scent of something lost yet unforgotten. Perhaps the scroll still waits, hidden beneath layers of dust, refusing to fade. Perhaps words, like souls, never die. They simply change the tongue that speaks them. And in the hush that follows, the storyteller's voice fades too, leaving only the whisper of parchment returning to dust, and the quiet certainty that knowledge can burn, but never truly disappear. There is a silence that belongs only to ruins, the kind that feels alive, as if stone itself were listening. In the ancient complex of Karnak, under the faint silver of a waning moon, the statues stand in endless rows, eyes unblinking, mouths half-parted, waiting for something only they remember. It is said there was a night when the statues wept, not with rain or time, but with tears that glimmered along their faces like dew on bronze. The Chronicles of Thebes, faintly etched in the so-called Book of the Temple, a fragment discovered near the Avenue of the Sphinxes, tell of an eclipse that darkened the city around the reign of Amenhotep III, around 1350 BCE. The sun vanished at midday, and in the sudden night, witnesses reported a strange sound, a deep, trembling hum, followed by droplets running down the cheeks of the colossal figures. Scholars later proposed a natural cause. The statues, heated by the desert sun and then cooled too quickly by shadow, condensed moisture drawn from the limestone itself. A coincidence, they said. Yet, the priests who served there called it a visitation, the gods mourning their own silence. Among those statues was one known to travelers as the vocal Memnon, a colossus that once sang at dawn. The Greek historian Strabo heard it himself in 24 BCE, describing the sound as a ringing like the stroke of metal. Roman visitors called it divine. When the statue was repaired under Emperor Septimius Severus, the song stopped forever. Perhaps the statues at Karnak remembered that voice. Perhaps when the sun was swallowed, they too tried to speak again. Archaeologists have found minute salt patterns around the eyes of several statues in the hypostyle hall, faint streaks like the trace of evaporated tears. Was it water, or the residue of offerings poured in devotion? In ancient hymns, the tears of stone were said to bring life. When the god weeps, the Nile rises. Imagine standing there, in that black noon, the sky sealed, the air trembling with a pulse you can feel in your chest. The priests raise their hands, murmuring invocations to Ammonius Ra, pleading for the sun's return. The torches flicker, and the massive faces gleam with moisture. Not rain, not blood, but the breath of creation itself. When the light returned, silence reigned again. Yet those who witnessed it never forgot. Some said the tears hardened into salt. Others said they sank into the ground, becoming part of the Nile's secret current. Thousands of years later, the statues still watch the dawn in silence. Their faces are worn, their eyes hollow, but when the first light of morning slides across the stone, one could almost imagine, for a heartbeat, that they remember what it felt like to cry. Perhaps the tears were never physical. Perhaps they were memory itself, the grief of gods who once walked among men, now bound in silence, weeping not for loss, but for remembrance. And so the desert holds its breath. The wind still hums faintly among the columns, a sound too low to measure, too soft to deny. Somewhere within it, the old lament stirs again. And for those who listen long enough, the statues still seem to whisper, "We are not gone. We are only dreaming." The night over Thebes glows like polished obsidian. Above the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, the air hums with an ancient hush, the kind that waits before a revelation. In that quiet, a single figure moves along the colonnades, her shadow long and silver in the torchlight. They say her name was Neferur, daughter of Hatshepsut, the child once groomed to rule. But history does not remember her reign, only the silence she left behind. In the carvings, she stands beside her mother, small but radiant, wearing the uraeus and the royal wig, holding a lotus as if it were a scepter of light. The temple inscriptions call her the one beloved by Ammonius, the voice of the horizon. And yet, after a few lines, she vanishes. No tomb has ever been found. No mami, no cartouche, just whispers and stars. Some say she did not die, but ascended, that she followed the maps drawn on the ceilings of the temples, those constellations that the priest astronomers carved with precision unmatched by centuries. On the ceilings of Dendera and Sennemut's tomb, her tutor and guardian, the skies are etched with the paths of Orion, Sirius, and the imperishable circumpolar stars. It is there the legend begins, the queen who learned to speak with the heavens. Each night, Neferur would climb to the upper terraces of her mother's temple, where priests kept vigil with water clocks and incense. They watched the stars rise from the east, marking time not by sand or shadow, but by light. Sirius, the goddess Sopdet, heralded the flood of the Nile. To the priests, her rising meant renewal. To Neferur, it meant something more, a voice. They say she could hear the rhythm of the sky, a pulse woven between the stars. When she spoke her prayers, her voice echoed not through the halls but upward, vanishing into the constellations. The priests called her the living star, and believed she was chosen to guard the sacred dialogue between earth and sky. Archaeologists later found a small fragment of alabaster near the sanctuary of Hatshepsut, carved faintly with a phrase, "She who listens to the heavens shall never fade." No scholar can confirm its author, but the style is of the 18th dynasty, and the script bears the unmistakable hand of a royal inscription. In 1903, an expedition led by Edouard Neville uncovered astronomical inscriptions within the tomb of Senenmut. Among the star charts, one figure stands out, a young woman with a crescent upon her brow, pointing toward the rising of Sirius. The accompanying glyph reads, "Her words travel with light." No record states that Neferur lived beyond her youth, yet her presence lingers where the heavens touch the earth. Perhaps she withdrew into the priesthood, becoming one of the divine adoratresses of Ammonius, guardians of ritual sound and silence. Perhaps she chose a different kind of immortality, one made not of stone, but of sky. Imagine her, standing upon the temple terrace, the Theban desert stretching endlessly below. The wind moves softly through her linen robe, the stars burning like hieroglyphs above. Her hands rise, tracing invisible constellations, words without sound, prayers without language. The torches flicker, and for a moment the night seems to listen. When the dawn finally breaks, the cliffs blush with rose light. The temple of Hatshepsut glows as though the sun itself were answering her call. And then she is gone, no trace, no tomb, no dust. Only the stars remain, carrying her name in silence. Perhaps Neferur did not vanish. Perhaps she simply became what she always was, a voice made of light, a queen who spoke to the stars, and was answered,